Greetings, fellow freelancers and game designers. Welcome back to Tabletop Mercenary, a show where I do my best to pull back the curtain on the TTRPG industry and explain how those of us in it actually try to make a living. Though I established my bona fides back in the first episode I did when I was explaining why people should listen to what I have to say about how to be a tabletop professional, I figured that I would actually go into my own journey and tell people how it is I got into the industry and how I wound up where I am now. Because I've been asked to speak about this on panels. I've had lots of people leave questions about this in the comment section of my blogs and various videos I've done. And lots of people seem to think that there's some hidden trick or there's some secret cheat code you can use to get in with a particular company or to achieve success as a TTRPG writer. And unfortunately, there isn't. If there is, I would have used it by now, and you all would definitely have known my name before you came to this channel. But I figure that by laying out the journey that I took to get here, hopefully this will illuminate some points of interest for folks, and it'll kind of show some of the things that you can repeat on your own journey, and maybe you can get to where I am, or hopefully a little further up the mountain than I've managed to get thus far. But to begin at the beginning, for folks who have followed my work since the earliest days of this leg of my career, I didn't actually set out to become a tabletop RPG designer. I played RPGs as a hobby, I enjoyed them very much, but my goal was originally to be a novelist. That was what I wanted to do for a living. And for those who are curious, I do have novels up on the market. If you just type my name into Amazon, you'll find them. Got some new ones coming out for the Christmas season too, so there's my self-insert plug there. But this was about 10 years or so ago, and I had not completed a single novel at this time, definitely hadn't published one, and I had only gotten a handful of short stories accepted by a relatively small publisher that I had just been introduced to, but I figured this was a good start, and my career was finally starting to build some momentum. And while I was on the Paizo website, I was just clicking through trying to check some of the errata for something for my game that evening. I didn't know if it had been changed or not. And I saw a little button on the website. It said, "Would you like to write for Paizo?" The obvious answer to this question is yes, I would. And I just clicked it. I figured it would take us to a submission portal, or maybe there would be an open call for something. And it was just an email address. It was, submit your name and your ideas and what you'd like to do, and we'll get back to you. I had taken my share of long shots before as a writer at this point in my career, and I figured, why not? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So I filled out the form, I sent it in, and figured, maybe I'd get a form rejection letter, and I tried. They've seen my name, if not my face, and maybe in the future, it'll go somewhere. I put it out of my mind and I forgot about it. Cut to a week, 2 weeks later, I don't remember exactly how long it was, I get an email back. And at first I'm thinking, well, this is probably just the form rejection letter. I can print it out and put it in the folder with all the other ones that I've amassed thus far. What I had assumed when I sent this particular email off was that it was going to a bot somewhere, just a slush pile full of ideas, and they would have interns dig through it or whatnot. I did not expect my email to wind up on the desk of James Jacobs, who, for folks who don't know the name, was one of the individuals who was very heavily involved with Paizo at the time. I believe he has since left the company, but he was in charge largely of their fiction arms and involved in a lot of the other gaming stuff too. And so this person, whose name I knew and had played stuff he had written, was writing me back asking me, well, what have you done? What are some ideas you have? And this put me in an awkward position because none of the stuff I had accepted had been published yet, so I couldn't just send him a link to it. I couldn't send him a copy of the released and published document. So I had a couple of self-published short stories that were up on a website that doesn't exist anymore. For those who remember Yahoo Voices, remember to take your ibuprofen today. But I sent him some links thinking, if nothing else, this will let him get a sense of my writing style and it'll see whether or not it's a good fit for the company. Even knowing the reputation of the website, for those who don't know it, it was essentially a user-generated content site. You could publish whatever you wanted on there. So being on the website was not a huge deal, and it was actually kind of a black mark against me. It would have been completely within his rights to just look at the address that this work had come from and decide, no, thanks, but no thanks. I don't want to investigate this further. But I was very fortunate in that he read my stories and thought, there's something here. Let's give this guy a shot. And so that was how I got my first assignment ever as an RPG writer was actually doing a short story for Paizo, back when they had the Pathfinder Tales was the name of the series. It was published at least once a week. I want to say it was a couple times a week up on the Paizo blog, and people could just go and read these short stories for free, and they worked as a great way to pull people into the setting. For those who are curious, The Irregulars was the name of my short story. It is currently available on Drive-Thru-RPG. If you want to go check it out, it's been re-released there. And I was very, very excited to get this job. I did not want to mess it up. And it was the fastest I have ever completed an assignment for a client. I had it done in, I believe, 7 days, maybe 8. It was very quick turnaround. Part of the reason for that is I was being paid 6 cents a word, which, for those who saw the last episode, is about double what you could expect for a professional rate. But that was my first ever acceptance. I didn't really have to do a whole lot of edits to the original when I turned it in. I was very proud of it. I feel it's held up pretty well, even in spite of my other work. But that was the first step on my journey, and that plays into what's about to come next. Because when this happened, I got a couple other assignments from Paizo. Blood of the Moon came my way because they just needed people, and my name was in rotation at the moment, so that was very handy, even though I didn't really write a whole lot for it. Bastards of Golarion was the other book that I worked on with Paizo's permission, and that was because someone else had dropped out and they needed a last-minute fill-in. And that was kind of the reputation I was hoping to garner, is someone you could reach out to and who would have fast turnaround with reliable content. Unfortunately for me, this was kind of the end of my journey with Paizo. Those are the only 3 projects I have worked on for them at the moment. Now, never say never, but so far, those are the only 3 from that particular label that I've worked on. But even with that said, that was a really good start for me, and it gave me something that I could show other people. Now, that was by no means career-making, but it was a good start. The next stage of my journey, because I didn't immediately become a tabletop RPG creator just because I had done that. I was very excited, I was very pleased, I was very proud, but it was something I was figuring I would dabble in. I would do that on the side, make a little extra pocket money, writing for RPG companies, unless maybe they wanted me to write a novel for them. I was still really focusing on that. That was really what I was hoping to do. And later on, it was either later that year or the year after, I got an invitation from a friend of mine to go to Gen Con. I had been to Gen Con several times. I am one of those very odd people who, as much as I love RPGs, I never really enjoy going to Gen Con. Part of it is I'm poor, and going to Gen Con without money is a uniquely depressing experience, because there's all of the really fun merch and all the really fun games that you can't buy, but the other part of it is everything at Gen Con costs money, so it's really hard to even play games or go to panels if you can't afford the ticket price. And that was a thing I had learned previously, but I was mostly going because he'd covered my badge, he'd covered my hotel room. All I had to do was help him hold down his booth, and I could just wander around, meet some other people, and have fun. And I was like, all right, I will do that. We will make this a networking opportunity. And so I showed up, I had my cards in hand, and I, when I wasn't watching my friend's booth, I was just going up and down, seeing who I could talk to, because one of the major advantages of conventions in general, of conventions like Gen Con in particular, is you can talk face-to-face, usually with the people who are releasing games. And I knew enough that I couldn't go just to the Paizo booth and expect people to know who I was, but I went to some of the smaller games. TPK Games in particular was one I handed my card out to, and I handed out probably 50 or 60 cards while I was there. TPK Games is the only one who got back to me. And Brian Berg, I believe that is. I will have to check that later. But yes, check their stuff out. They put out a lot of amazing things, and I was part of probably 24 of them directly because of this. A man took my card and asked me, well, what do you do? And I told him, I've just done these projects for Paizo, and he was very impressed by that. And so he gave me his card back, and it wasn't just the standard business card, that he had out at the booth for everybody else. So no, this is my personal card for people I want to actually get a hold of me. And so, that was my next connection. He got a hold of me, once I got back home, and I told him, I'm looking to fill my schedule. I could take on some extra projects. What do you have? And that was how I ended up doing things for the Feats of Legends series, along with a couple of modules that I wrote for TPK games before, they sort of moved on to other stuff, working on games that I wasn't very familiar with and didn't have the time and extra resources to become familiar with. But, that filled out my roster a lot more, and that got me noticed by more people. I still wouldn't say at this point that I was fully a tabletop RPG designer. I had a pretty good amount of credits. I was capable of doing stuff relatively quickly. There were a few people who had my name and my email, but I wasn't recognized in the industry. That wasn't what people knew me for. Even folks who had books that I'd worked on, I was just one of dozens of names inside of it they wouldn't know. The next two steps are really what solidified this whole stage of my career and what sort of led me to where I am now. I was going to a Pathfinder Infinite game. Pathfinder Society. Pathfinder Infinite hadn't been launched yet, but I was going to a society game because I didn't have a regular table I was going to, and I knew some friends who played at the local game shop, so I was like, I'll show up and we'll play and we'll have fun and hang out. Do a quick dungeon crawl for a couple hours, support your local community. And, I talked to Tom, who was the guy who was our sort of go-to GM whenever no one else showed up who had filled out the paperwork and had the right to do this. And I was talking to him about some of the stuff I'd been working on and asking him if he had any ideas, because I know he'd written for a couple of companies, quote unquote, back in the day. He'd done it 3 or 4 years before I'd met him. And, he was really impressed. He was really excited. And he told me I should reach out to Kobold Press, which I had never seen anything from. There wasn't a whole lot of third-party stuff allowed at my table, and I didn't have money to go seeking it out. So, I got a hold of Kobold Press not long after they'd stopped their physical magazine. Well, not long after it stopped being traded in comic book shops, at least. But they had, a website that was still going, and they had a blog that they needed content for, so I ended up writing a couple series of articles for their blog, and this put me in touch with individuals that are still, as far as I know, pretty high up in that particular company. And it made my name recognizable to a whole new audience. There were people who, even if they had played stuff I'd worked on, even if they'd seen me make social media posts, they didn't really know me until there was content with my byline on it coming out a couple times a week right in front of them. And this is the second to last stage. This is when people started to really recognize me as that guy who wrote that one article. And it was around this time that I took some initiative and I started releasing some stuff on my own, because I was looking around and thinking, well, I'm getting a very decent amount of work just doing gaming stuff. Maybe if I release some of my own articles, my own ideas, if I start my own blog, things like that, that'll get people in to, come check out my work. And so it was around 8 or 9 years ago, maybe slightly longer, that I started really upping what I was trying to do with my blogs, The Literary Mercenary, which was my writing blog that I thought was going to be the big important one, and then Taking 10, or Improved Initiative, which is the one that most people know me for. And in addition to doing a lot of smaller articles just about gaming in general or boosting my own signal, I started releasing character conversion guides. Folks who are fans of the first edition of Pathfinder might have come across one of the 60 some odd guides that I ended up putting together throughout the length of this project. But it all started because there was a new game master that I was playing under who was kind of wet behind the ears, and he made a lot of questionable calls, one of which was allowing way too many people at the table to take leadership. And I decided it would be fun to do my best to recreate the Hulk. And this was early on in the Pathfinder cycle, so they didn't have 9 or 10 different ways you could do this. They had just released the Master Shimist, which was a prestige class that basically gave you a Jekyll and Hyde character, allowing you to physically transform into a bigger, meaner, more brutal version of your character. And so I did my very best to convert everyone's favorite Green Goliath, and then I wrote up the build that I did for it because I was really pleased by it, and I thought it was really fun to play with. And a lot of people really liked that. And so I decided to make that a regular feature of my articles going forward. I went through many of the core members of the film Avengers. I went through Gotham's Knights. I went through a lot of the Rogues galleries for various characters. I moved out into Game of Thrones. I did a whole bunch of stuff for this particular series. And that series was sort of what ended up making my brand among a lot of people. Of I was known as that guy who did character conversions and who wrote guides for how to build a really interesting, really unique character. And this is what got the attention of Azukail Games, who I still work with today. But essentially, Adrian had just been out and about, doing what he did as the person who ran a relatively small but successful games company. And he was looking around in the field, seeing who was bringing stuff out, who was popular right now. And apparently my name kept coming up. So he sent me an email and said, "Hey, I've seen your work. I think it's really interesting. Are you available? Do you have more stuff, that you could take on?" And the conversation was essentially, it's like, if you have money, I have time, what do you need done? And this is how I eventually, over the past, it's probably been 5 or 6 years now, made it so that I was releasing at least one supplement every month, and then occasionally 2 supplements a month for Azukail Games. They've become the publisher that's taken on my Sundara Dawn of a New Age setting. They're responsible for a lot of my World of Darkness content, and yeah, it's... they're not the only person I work for, by all means. I have rent to pay, and I can't do that with just one company. But they are a large part of the reason that I have such a large collection of supplements, and it's why I have the freedom to put out so much different stuff, is because, Adrian and I have a working relationship where I can essentially write him an email and pitch him an idea, and he can look at the numbers and see, well, this looks like it could work. Let's give it a try and figure it out. And, that body of work is why so many other either independent creators or so many companies will see me. They'll see that number of, 167, 168 supplements with my name on them. And I get that recognition of, this is someone who has a body of work. Let's reach out to them, see if they're interested in this project we're doing. And that's kind of the current end of my journey. I'm just sort of keeping a steady pace and doing my best to make it up the mountain. But of those steps, if you wanted to get into the games industry, if you want to become a professional RPG designer, writer, artist, creator, whatever it is you want to do, there's a lot of stuff that I have done that's worked for me. And while not everything that I have done, not every step, not every website I have worked for is even around anymore, or that's not the way things are done anymore, you can still do a lot of these things because the industry hasn't moved that far in the past 10 years or so. And to explain what I mean, first and foremost, the major lesson that I would give absolutely anyone is, if you want to do this for a living, do not wait until you're quote unquote good enough to do it professionally, to be paid for it. Show up and expect to be given your worth. Offer to do the job. Don't show up saying, I'll do it for free, maybe I'll do it for some exposure. If you're going to take that shot, if you're going to reach out and email a company saying, I want to work for you, show up with confidence, show up with gravitas, and the worst they can tell you is no. The best they can tell you is, we like your attitude, can you get it to us by next month? And that can go a very long way. Second thing I would recommend, get a body of work as quickly as you can. This is the same across the publishing world, it's the same across the art world, of people judge you for future projects based on what you've already done. I was very, very, very fortunate in my early days, but essentially it's like showing up and saying, I can paint this mural for you, and when the person who needs the mural painted says, like, okay, give me an example of your art, what do? You just kind of talk them through your process, but you can't show them a painting. And it's sort of the same thing of whether you start a blog, whether you write articles for a website you can just submit them to, whether you put together videos on YouTube, talking about your particular favorite game or a thing that you think is really interesting. Whatever you can do to show that you understand the game in question, or that you are an asset to a design team or how an industry works, do that. It is very, very, very important to have a body of work. Excuse me. Third thing, this is also very important, and it comes along a little bit with the previous two, but it is kind of its own separate thing, and it's the great dichotomy of tabletop RPGs in general. We've all heard the joke of, this is the nerdiest game in the world to play, but you need at least 4 friends to get it done. Very similar with being a game designer. Lots of us just want to sit in our rooms and we want to play with our little ideas, and we want to write up our scenarios, and we don't want to go and we don't want to bother people. We don't want to go out and promote ourselves. We don't want we don't want to do the actual selling part of it. We just want to write the content, make our money, and leave. And that would be lovely, but that is not the way things work, unfortunately. To get ahead in any part of the publishing industry, but particularly in a niche part of the industry like this, you need contacts. You need to network with people. And while that sounds very business, very serious, it's important to remember that we are part of a hobby that thrives off of networking. We all know people. We all know people who know people. And it is, ironically, the easiest way that you can get work in tabletop RPGs is to play tabletop RPGs with as many people as possible. Whether you're going to a convention, you just join an open table, whether you show up to an organized event and you know there's going to be a designer there or a celebrity game player there. Whatever it is, the more people you can meet, the more people you can talk to, the more people you're going to meet who can help you out. And this is not just true of getting ahead in RPGs, of the more games you join and the more people you meet, the more opportunities that'll open for you in general. A good example of this is one of my early jobs as a security guard when I was still in college. I met a guy who was playing the villain of our Star Wars game. Turns out he was the hiring director of the security company that I was applying to, unbeknownst to me. So you never know who's actually sitting across the table from you, and you never know who you're going to see at an event, at a convention, at whatever it is. And that is something to keep in mind. Don't turn every event you go to into a business opportunity, but keep that in mind of the more people you know and the more work you have out there for people to see and to evaluate, and the bigger your reputation becomes, whether it's a reputation for fast turnaround, for knowledge of a particular game system, whether it's a reputation for someone who will fill in at the last moment if something goes wrong and you need a pinch hitter. These are the things that will end up being the building blocks of your career, honestly. And it is most important to remember, particularly when it comes to networking, when you help people, people want to help you. So if you can do something for someone else, it is always a good idea to do that. Other creators are not your competition. They are not taking business away from you. We're all in this together, and we all need to help each other. And this is something to remember, because I have lost count of the number of times I have had someone come to me and say, I just got kicked this project. I really wish I could do it, but I don't have the time, or it doesn't pay me what I need. Are you interested? If you are, I'll just have them reach out to you and you can fill in for me. And that is the unfortunate truth of how you become a tabletop game designer. It's all about just faking it till you make it a lot of the time, and just getting your name out there and letting people know that you are capable of doing this, and showing them through the things that you make that you are capable of doing it. Whether it's releasing dungeon maps, or doing cool art, or putting out tracks or articles about how to be a good GM, or character build guides. Anything you can do is something you should do, because there are dozens and dozens and dozens of people who say they want to do this for a job. They want this to be their side hustle, or they think they can make it big as a TTRPG creator. Of those dozens of people, maybe one person will actually have the discipline, the energy, the effort to sit down and make a thing and put that thing out there. Whether it's put out on a free platform like YouTube, or whether it's on a blog that people can read, or whether they clean it up and make it real nice and release it on DriveThruRPG and it does really well and gets noticed. You can't be a designer until you make things. The ironic thing is that once you start making stuff, you've become a designer. It's the conundrum of, if you wait around for someone to tell you that you're now a tabletop RPG designer, it's never going to happen. You have to essentially reach out, decide this is what I'm going to do, and this is what I'm going to follow through on. And once you've decided to do that, it gets a whole lot easier, let me tell you. But that was a brief walkthrough of how I got to where I am today, and hopefully I blazed a bit of a trail for folks who are wondering how you can do what I've done and how you can start your own journey up this mountain to hopefully a big payday at the top of it. And As always, if you've got any questions or if you're curious about something that I mentioned in this week's episode, leave it down in the comments below. If you have a topic you want to see covered in the future, do not hesitate to let me know. I want these topics to be things that watchers are interested in. I want to answer your questions, so don't be shy. And until next time, this is your Tabletop Mercenary, signing off. First and foremost, thank you for staying to the end of this episode of Tabletop Mercenary. If there's a question you have about being an RPG creator, please don't hesitate to put it in the comments below so I can address it in a future episode. If you want to help me keep the lights on and keep this show going, then please consider subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and giving it a share on your own social media pages to help boost the signal. Lastly, if you really enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a tip by buying me a Ko-fi or becoming a Patreon patron at the links in the video description below. You'll find me on both sites under the name The Literary Mercenary.